just a heads up before we start this deep dive. It contains references to child sexual abuse, police corruption, and institutional misconduct.
Yeah, some of the content may be distressing for listeners.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Support is available if you need it. Lifeline is on 13 11 14.
And 1800 RESPECT is on 1-800-737-732. Please reach out if you need to.
Okay? We are your hosts. I'm the Illuminator.
And I am the architect.
We're investigative journalists employed by Underground Media Network.
And all the material in this deep dive has been thoroughly reviewed and verified by Landon Germanata Mills, who's the editor-in-chief of UMN.
Underground Media Network absolutely supports the claims made by Michelle Carlin.
We do. In fact, we support all whistleblowers who risk everything to speak the truth. It takes incredible courage.
It really does. Their courage makes accountability possible, and, well, we stand with them every single time.
We also need to state that organizations named in this deep dive were contacted for comment.
Right, and no responses were received before we started recording.
Okay, this is Journalism with Teeth.
This is The Deep Dive. Welcome to The Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into something significant. It's an in-depth examination of some very severe allegations.
Yeah, we're talking about systemic misconduct, corruption, and what looks like a deeply disturbing pattern of retaliation.
All within the New South Wales police force. And these aren't just abstract allegations, they're truths brought forward by a former insider, Senior Constable Michelle Carlin.
And what she experienced, what she says she uncovered, it's definitely going to challenge, conventional perceptions of the force.
Absolutely. So our mission in this deep dive really is to meticulously unpack Michelle Carlin's decade-long experience. We've got quite a bit to draw on.
We do. We've looked at her raw, unfiltered personal accounts, a lot shared publicly on social media.
Which takes guts in itself.
Huge guts. Alongside that, we have detailed journalistic investigations from Underground Media Network, plus expert analysis trying to piece it all together.
And what emerges from these sources, I think, is a really unflinching look into the costs, the profound personal costs, and the institutional costs of speaking truth to power.
Especially in a system that, based on these accounts, seems to actively resist that truth.
And for you, listening, this isn't just one person's story, however harrowing it is. It's much bigger than that.
Definitely. It's a deeply interwoven narrative. It forces us to ask some critical, pretty uncomfortable questions.
Questions about institutional integrity, how whistleblowers are treated.
And fundamentally about the very mechanisms of justice itself in our society.
So expect some surprising facts, some difficult truths, maybe some of those aha moments that might reshape how you view authority and accountability.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this.
Right. So Section 1, Michelle Carlin's journey from hopeful officer to, well, whistleblower.
Let's start at the beginning, the ideal versus the reality, joining the force and that early disillusionment.
Okay. So Michelle Carlin, she started with the NSW police force back in 2013. She had a bachelor in policing.
And her motivation, according to the sources, was this really profound commitment to justice, cultural integrity, and reformist ambition.
Yeah, she wasn't just joining to, wear the uniform. She wanted to make a difference, and particularly as a proud Aboriginal woman.
Right. That identity was key. She wanted to bridge what she saw as these significant cultural chasms
between over-policed communities, often Indigenous communities, and the police force itself.
It sounds like a really idealistic, a really noble goal starting out, to heal, to reform from the inside.
Absolutely. But what the sources reveal is, well, that idealism didn't last long. It seems there was a stark and pretty rapid descent into disillusionment.
Her genuine desire for actual reform, for real change, was apparently met with what she calls performative engagement with diversity.
Performative? That's a strong word. What does that mean in practice?
Well, instead of welcoming her insights, her efforts to build cultural understanding, her image, her identity as an Aboriginal woman was essentially co-opted.
Co-opted how?
For PR purposes, public relations. They liked having her face in their campaigns, it seems.
But not her actual input.
Exactly. Her contributions were dismissed, her insights marginalized, and her advocacy, trying to push for change, was subtly penalized.
Wow. So using her identity, but silencing her voice.
That's precisely the distinction she made. She's quoted as saying, "They loved my photo for their campaigns, but not my voice."
Just think about that. You join with these high hopes, wanting to bridge gaps, and you find you're basically being used as a prop.
While your actual ideas are ignored or even punished, it must have been crushing.
And this shift, it happened quickly.
Seems so. It transformed her working environment from what she hoped would be public service into something she describes as having structural hostility, institutionalized racism, and operational cynicism.
That's a pretty bleak picture of the internal culture.
She observed officers, she says, actively resisted displays of compassion, especially towards vulnerable people like detainees.
Resisted compassion.
They apparently saw it as weakness. Or even subversion, like showing empathy was somehow against the grain.
So being decent was seen as a problem.
That's how she puts it. She stated very plainly, I was targeted for being kind.
Targeted for being kind.
Yeah. And this initial experience, this betrayal, it wasn't just a one-off bad experience. It was like a chilling foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing of what?
Of a much more disturbing, more pervasive, systemic reality she was about to uncover. It suggested the culture wasn't just flawed, it actively punished the very integrity she was trying to bring.
Okay, so that leads us into the next part. This idea of a culture beyond reform. Unpacking the institutional misconduct and the complicity she alleges.
Right. Because her disclosures later on, they describe what really sounds like a profound ethical and operational collapse within the NSW police.
And the conduct she witnessed, it wasn't being addressed.
According to her, it was unreported by leadership, enabled by pure complicity, and normalized within procedural routines.
Normalized. So it wasn't seen as exceptions, but part of the everyday.
That's the picture painted. Not just bad apples, but something woven into the fabric of daily operations, which makes it incredibly hard to challenge, obviously.
And the examples she gives, they're pretty confronting.
Deeply unsettling. She talks about the casual circulation of explicit crime scene imagery.
Explicit images? Like what?
Including, disturbingly, unauthorized photographs of deceased women and children, passed around between officers.
How?
Through things like encrypted apps and private message threads, unofficial channels.
Why were they sharing these? Not for investigation.
No, that's the horrifying part. Not for case review, not for investigation, but shared, quote, as sources of amusement.
Amusement. Sharing photos of deceased people for amusement.
Her words are stark on this. Photos were shared, comments made, bodies weren't sacred, they were punchlines.
That's deeply shocking. The level of dehumanization, the callousness.
Yeah.
It's chilling.
Absolutely. And what's really significant here is that Michelle's claims don't exist in a vacuum. There's corroborating testimony.
From who?
From an individual we're calling Kai. It's a pseudonym, obviously, to protect her identity and safety.
Okay. And who is Kai?
She's a former crime scene investigator, dedicated over 11 years to the New South Wales police force.
11 years. That's a long time.
A very long time. And like Michelle, Kai started out with this deep belief in public service, fairness, and the protection of vulnerable communities.
But her experience, it ended up being similar.
It mirrors Michelle's quite closely. She also came to see a system that, in her words, prioritized self-protection over accountability.
That seems to be a recurring theme, doesn't it? Idealism hitting a wall of institutional self-preservation.
It really does. Kai talks about the intense psychological strain she endured during her years there.
From the job itself, crime scenes, that sort of thing.
No, interestingly, she emphasizes it wasn't from the dangers of frontline policing, but from the corrosive dynamics among colleagues.
The corrosive dynamics? Like what?
It started subtly, being sidelined, but escalated into targeted harassment and persistent exclusion.
Which took a toll.
A significant toll. It led to a formal diagnosis of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
From workplace harassment, essentially.
Exactly. And she ended up resigning in 2018. Her reflection on it is powerful.
What did she say?
She said, I didn't leave because I wasn't strong enough. I left because no one else was willing to stand up to what was happening.
Wow. That puts the onus back on the system, not the individual. It wasn't her failing. It was the system failing to support integrity.
Precisely. It suggests a system that doesn't just tolerate toxicity, but maybe even systematically breaks people who try to uphold its own stated values.
A way to maintain the status quo.
Seems like it. Kai also talked about witnessing this widespread erosion of basic respect.
Especially in sensitive situations.
Yes, particularly at death scenes and cases involving vulnerable persons, which aligns with Michelle's account about the photos.
And she raised specific concerns.
She did. about officers constantly using their private mobile phones while on duty at crime scenes.
Why was that a concern?
She believed it enabled serious ethical violations. Her logic was clear. We had radios. There was no operational need for personal phones out at crime scenes. It became a tool for things that had no place in the job.
Like sharing those inappropriate photos, potentially.
That seems to be the implication, a way to conduct unofficial, unregulated business, bypassing oversight.
And when she spoke up about this,
She says there was no protection-only pushback. She describes being ignored, marginalized, and ultimately driven out.
driven out for raising a legitimate concern about ethical conduct and procedure.
The message seems clear. Conform, stay silent, or you'll be pushed out.
So you've got this environment described as not just toxic, but actively hostile, where misconduct is allegedly normalized and speaking up is punished.
Exactly. And in that kind of environment, individual officers like Michelle, who maybe dared to show compassion or question things, they didn't just witness misconduct.
They became targets themselves.
Precisely. And this is where the story takes an even darker, more personal turn into direct abuse and betrayal.
Okay, let's talk about that personal betrayal. Because it wasn't just observing misconduct from afar for Michelle Carlong.
No, not at all. She became a direct victim herself. The sources detail these really harrowing experiences: sexual assault, physical assault, persistent bullying.
And crucially, not from criminals they were arresting.
Shockingly, no. Directly from her own colleagues within the New South Wales police.
That's a profound breach of trust. Unimaginable, really.
The specific incidents she recounts are horrific. She states very explicitly, "I was SERPed by a Penrith police officer on duty."
On duty by a colleague.
And she describes another terrifying moment. "I had a 9 placed at the back of my head."
Again, presumably by a colleague.
Yeah.
The context implies that.
The context certainly implies it's part of the pattern of internal abuse she experienced. These aren't minor complaints. They are grave accusations of violence, abuse of power.
And a complete failure of the institution to protect its own officer.
Absolutely. And there's a key piece of evidence she points to regarding these incidents.
What's that?
She filed a workers' compensation claim covering these things. And according to her, full liability was taken by their insurer.
Full liability accepted by the insurer. That's significant, isn't it?
It strongly suggests, as Michelle argues, that she presented sufficient evidence to support it. Insurers don't typically accept full liability lightly.
So the claim was validated, essentially. But what happened then? Did that lead to justice, support?
Apparently not. Despite this acknowledgement of liability, the NSW police response was, according to Michelle, to decide to medically retire me instead.
Medically retire her. Why?
She says she was never told why or served any documents as to what they relied on, nor was I given any opportunity to fight this decision.
So it felt like a forced removal, not support.
That's how she frames it. Less like help, more like a strategic way to get rid of someone raising serious problems without actually addressing the problems themselves.
And beyond those major assaults, there was ongoing harassment.
Relentless, it seems, and varied. Both professional and personal attacks.
Like what?
She talks about petty but insidious things. Officers shining a torchlight into my cameras while they screech the wheels of the police car outside her home, or revving a police car in my driveway.
Things designed to intimidate, to make her feel unsafe, even at home.
Exactly. And inside the workplace, too. Pulling chairs out from under her, or, bizarrely, pulling the magazine out of her firearm and scattering the bullets on the floor.
What? Why would someone do that?
It sounds like pure humiliation, undermining her professionally, making her literally crawl around to pick up bullets, demeaning and dangerous.
And the disrespect bled into professional duties, too.
Profoundly. She mentions colleagues drawing dicks in my notebook, and her point is sharp. As funny as that seems, it's not funny when you need to take details about someone's dead kid and the family see a fucking dick drawn all through my notebook.
Oh my God, that's appalling. In front of a grieving family. The lack of empathy, professionalism.
It's shocking, and the abuse escalated. She says she was physically and sexually assaulted throughout my career, bullied on a near-daily basis, threatened.
And the gun incident. She mentions pew-pews from my colleagues, pulled on me and pointed at my head. Using that colloquial term, pew-pew, almost makes it sound casual, but pointing a weapon at someone's head is.
It's incredibly serious, a terrifying threat, regardless of the term used. And chillingly, the harassment didn't stop when she left the force.
It continued after her medical retirement.
She alleges it did, stating, "To this day, I am still harassed daily by police."
Daily? How?
She describes a whole campaign, officers knocking on her door, pulling her over constantly, calls, emails, driving past her house repeatedly, revving police cars, shining torches into her home cameras.
It sounds like a vendetta,
Yeah.
a deliberate effort to keep intimidating her even after she was out.
That's certainly the implication. And what's truly alarming, she says, is the official response when she reported these things.
What happened when she reported them?
Consistently declined to investigate or shut down immediately with no investigation whatsoever.
Even as she had evidence. She mentioned CCTV, phone logs, emails.
Despite her claims of having evidence, she says the reports went nowhere. This complete lack of internal accountability is maybe the most disturbing part.
It suggests a system designed to protect itself, to ignore internal problems rather than address them.
Exactly. It paints a picture not just of individual bad actors, but potentially an institutional strategy. Create an environment so hostile, so personally devastating, that the whistleblower is simply broken or silenced.
Psychological warfare, almost.
That's what it sounds like. And this relentless pressure, this torrent of abuse, it ultimately led to a profound personal crisis for Michelle.
A breakdown.
Yes. Which the institution then seemingly used to its advantage.
Right. So this leads to the idea of psychological collapse almost being used as an institutional weapon.
Yeah, the sources really frame it that way. The cumulative burden of racism, isolation, and moral distress she experienced. It all built up.
Leading to what she calls a traumatic psychological rupture.
Exactly. And the point made is that this breakdown wasn't sudden or random. It wasn't unpredictable.
It was the result of everything she'd endured.
It's presented as the logical outcome of prolonged exposure to a toxic environment that punishes integrity and rewards silence. The system created the conditions for the breakdown.
And the institution's response wasn't helpful.
Far from it, according to Michelle. The suggestions that her collapse wasn't met with support, but was actually used strategically to silence her, to remove her.
How so?
Well, following her breakdown, she was hospitalized. She was subsequently diagnosed with complex PTSD.
Complex PTSD, that reflects prolonged trauma.
It does, but instead of offering genuine support, rehabilitation, maybe restitution, the institution allegedly expedited her medical discharge.
Pushed her out faster because she was now officially diagnosed.
That seems to be the implication. Her own reflection on it is heartbreaking. I left the station in tears. No one checked on me for 14 hours. It felt deliberate, like they wanted me to break.
14 hours, just abandoned after a breakdown.
That's her account. This quiet, seemingly deliberate severance. It effectively silenced her, removed her from the system she was challenging. Or so they might have thought.
But it didn't silence her permanently.
No. And this is crucial. What the organization perhaps failed to anticipate was her sheer, unwavering resolve.
The trauma didn't break her spirit.
It seems instead it fueled it. Instead of retreating into silence, she channeled that trauma, that anger, that sense of injustice
Into fighting back.
into a meticulously planned campaign for accountability. If they wouldn't deal with it internally, she decided she would bring it into the light.
Okay, Section 2, the fight for justice. This is about the retaliation she faced, but also her relentless pursuit of accountability.
Exactly. She didn't just, fade away after being medically retired. Far from it.
She redirected the trauma.
Yes, into what the sources describe as a meticulously structured campaign for accountability. This wasn't just lashing out.
It was strategic.
Highly strategic. Her public stance was not reactive. It was deliberate, evidence-based, and rooted in legal strategy. She was organized. She was prepared.
What specific actions did she take?
A multi-pronged approach. Systematically assembling documentary evidence, records, logs, emails, everything you could gather. Engaging legal professionals to navigate the system. Contacting political representatives to raise awareness at that level.
And going public.
And speaking to the media. Bringing her story out from behind closed doors, it shows incredible determination given the power imbalance.
And she claims the police force actively tried to stop her.
She does. She states the NSW police spent hundreds of thousands trying to stop me.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Taxpayer money, presumably.
That's the implication. Spent trying to silence one former officer, but her defiant statement says it all. But I'm still standing.
Incredible resilience. But this fight, it wasn't easy. She alleges significant retaliation.
Yes, and this is where it gets really concerning. She describes robust and critically allegedly illegal retaliation.
Illegal. How?
Extending even into the judicial realm itself. Interference with the legal process.
Okay, let's unpack these allegations of judicial and institutional interference. And personal vendettas. This sounds serious.
Extremely serious. Michelle alleges direct interference from senior command figures, people high up in the police force,
Interfering how?
acting to stymie legal proceedings,
Hmm.
basically block or hinder court cases, acting to undermine subpoenas, legal orders for documents or testimony, and even pressure witnesses into silence.
Pressuring witnesses. That's obstruction of justice, surely.
If substantiated, absolutely. These actions, as the analysis points out, point to a deeply embedded institutional resistance to transparency. It suggests the pushback wasn't just bureaucratic inertia, it was potentially deliberate high-level interference.
Can you give specific examples she raised?
Yes. Regarding suppression of evidence, she talks about a specific Magistrate Love,
Okay.
who apparently directed the NSW police to produce these documents on the 250/2/25. The magistrate ruled her request for these documents was legitimate.
So a court order to hand over documents. Did they comply?
According to Michelle, no. She says they are still arguing, even against a direct judicial order.
Why would they fight so hard if the court says, produce them?
Well, Michelle's take is revealing. She says, I already have copies of the documents. I am proving how far they will go to hide what they've done to me. It suggests the fight isn't about the documents themselves, but about demonstrating the institution's alleged resistance.
And she questions who ordered this resistance.
She does. She asks if it's on the direction of Karen Webb or delegate. Directly pointing fingers at the police commissioner level. It's a huge accusation.
Well, okay, what else? There were allegations related to domestic violence, too.
Yes, and this part is incredibly disturbing. It involves her husband. She states he was already convicted of a crime against me. So there's a documented history of him being the perpetrator.
Okay, so he had a conviction against her.
Yes. But then, she says 19 months later, they said I was having a mental health episode and broke his hand. They tried to flip the narrative, make her the aggressor.
Despite his prior conviction against her.
Yes, and she says his own medical records clearly state are not consistent with the method he describes for how his hand was allegedly broken, suggesting his story doesn't add up medically.
So what does she say happened?
She says she performed a wrist lock on him to flee after being, and this is horrific, strangled, punched in the face, my palliative son's favorite toy, smashed in front of him while he had an AVO in place.
He had an AVO against him, a protection order. And he allegedly attacked her again.
That's her claim. An apprehended violence order was in place meant to protect her, and he allegedly breached it violently. Her action was defensive, to escape.
And yet she was accused.
That's what she says. She also adds, with deep regret, I beg the magistrate not to jail him for the original conviction. Actions I now deeply regret. It paints a picture of her trying to be lenient, perhaps, and it backfiring terribly.
This sounds like an attempt to discredit her, using a domestic violence situation against her.
That's certainly how it's framed. A way to undermine her credibility as a whistleblower by painting her as unstable or violent.
And the alleged targeting went beyond the legal system, into her personal life, finances.
Yes. She claims police actions led to her DV assistance being taken away. The support services she needed as a victim were removed.
That's cruel.
And she alleges they refused to take over 80 DV reports off me for the last year. 80 reports of domestic violence incidents allegedly ignored by police.
80? That's staggering. Deliberate inaction, she claims.
Yes. And financial targeting, too. Allegedly, they froze my ADO Australian Taxation Office account and had my Centrelink Social Security canceled.
Cutting off her income and creating tax problems.
Resulting in significant debt I couldn't fix and will cost $5,000 to get a court order to sort it out. It looks like a systemic campaign to destabilize her completely, emotionally, financially.
There were also claims about misuse of medical records.
Deeply unethical allegations there. Police illegally accessed my medical records, telling medical staff I was being investigated for Haitianicide.
Investigated for homicide. That's a massive, damaging lie to tell medical staff.
A huge breach of privacy, a way to poison her relationship with healthcare providers, potentially, and public shaming, too. She claims police leaked my charges to the community so that random people in the public would spit on me.
Leaking information to incite public hatred and assault? That's appalling.
Truly appalling, if true. And the harassment allegedly continued, involving false allegations against her concerning her son.
Her palliative son. What happened there?
Her husband, she says, put up a video alleging I abused my palliative son, with, she insists, absolutely no evidence, only his word, and manipulated or doctored screenshots.
An incredibly painful accusation, especially involving a vulnerable child.
Absolutely. And despite the alleged lack of evidence, she says she's been harassed to an extreme by police AVO compliance checks excessive checks related to the violence order, seemingly as harassment.
And surveillance claims, too.
Yes. My car has been illegally tracked, my phone illegally tapped, STIB bugged my house. STIB likely refers to the State Technical Investigation Branch, suggesting official surveillance resources were used against her.
All while she's in civil litigation against them.
Exactly. She points out this is happening while I am currently in civil litigation proceedings, exposing what the Enswawi police did to me during my 10 years with them. The timing suggests an effort to derail her legal fight.
And the police response to her subpoenas in that case.
This is where it gets even more tangled. When she subpoenaed her husband's brief related to the domestic violence incident,
Yes.
the NSW commissioner, or delegate, hired a litigation team to represent them and object to the facts from the incident in question being accessed because he's the victim.
Wait, the police commissioner hired lawyers to block access to information about an incident where her husband was the convicted party previously, claiming he's the victim now.
That's Michelle's incredulous allegation. It leads to her direct accusation against the commissioner, Karen Webb.
What does she accuse Webb of?
Karen Webb does not represent us. She is the one trying to falsely convict me and set her own staff up to hide what they've done. And she adds, the commissioner of police wants to suppress the DV history from the court because his version is the only one they want to be true.
These are incredibly serious allegations. Obstruction, manipulation of the justice system, protecting institutional interest over truth, allegedly right from the top.
It paints a chilling picture. Not just resistance, but alleged systematic subversion of justice itself, using the institution's power against an individual seeking accountability.
And these devastating personal battles, they actually pushed her to look deeper.
Paradoxically, yes. The more they allegedly tried to crush her, the more she apparently started connecting dots, leading her to believe this wasn't just about her case, but part of a much larger network of corruption.
Right, so this leads to her uncovering what she believes is a deeper network of corruption extending beyond the police.
Exactly. She mentions her time working on Strike Force Eckersley. Apparently, it involved a lot of paperwork, sorting documents.
Okay, an administrative role.
Seemingly. But she says she utilized her special skill of pattern recognition. She likens herself to the character in the Good Doctor TV show.
Able to see connections others miss.
That's the idea. Seeing patterns in vast amounts of information, connecting seemingly disparate dots. Not just speculation, but methodical analysis, she suggests.
And this pattern recognition led her somewhere.
It did. She explains she kept digging when she was told by a crime manager, we weren't to investigate certain matters.
She is told to drop investigations.
Yes, and the reasons given, she says, didn't make any sense. When she checked them against legislation and protocols, they didn't add up.
So her pursuit of logical consistency led her further.
It led her to a really startling conclusion, that the corruption was pervasive, systemic, and stretched far beyond the police force, into other government agencies.
How far back does she think this goes?
She references the findings of the Wood Royal Commission from 1997. That was a major inquiry into police corruption here in NSW.
Right, I remember that. It was huge.
It was. And it estimated a criminal network of 30,000 to 50,000 people with, quote, deep roots in every government agency in Australia.
30 to 50,000. That's an enormous network.
Huge. And Michelle uses this historical context to argue that this isn't just history.
She thinks it's still happening.
Yes. She makes an alarming claim related to Daruk that refers to historical child sexual abuse allegations in institutions. She says, what happened at Daruk isn't historical, it's happening and now.
Implying ongoing abuse and cover-up.
That's the heavy implication. She mentions reading statements related to Daruk that will haunt me for eternity, suggesting a continuity of these horrific events and the network protecting them.
And she questions the effectiveness of past inquiries.
She believes the last Royal Commission was corrupted, which, if true, is a devastating blow to public trust in those very mechanisms meant to uncover corruption.
Does she offer any current evidence for this ongoing network?
She points to something specific. A suppressed 2015 parliamentary dossier.
Suppressed dossier. What's in it?
According to her, it names high-profile alleged offenders, including a former prime minister, 28 names in total.
A former PM named in connection with this alleged network. Why is it suppressed?
Michelle asserts the authorities are suppressing the 28 names because the second it gets released, everyone will be able to see what I saw, who is friends with who, and it will expose the current ring.
So releasing the names would reveal the connections, the web.
That's her claim. A cover-up involving high-level figures to protect this ongoing network.
The scale of these allegations is immense. She must be aware of the risks she's taking.
Oh, absolutely. She openly grapples with the legal implications. She asks questions like, are whistleblowers exempted from treason if the documents I produce could take down every government agency plus numerous churches?
Treason. That's extreme.
It shows the stakes she believes are involved. Or, she asks, will she get a Section 14 Mental Health Act because I'm crazy, suggesting they might try to discredit her through psychiatric means.
Or that the system itself might be too compromised to act.
Exactly. She wonders if nothing happens because there won't be any magistrates left without a conflict of interest. A chilling thought that the corruption is so widespread it paralyzes the justice system.
But she believes she has the evidence.
Despite the risks, she states she has enough information to potentially convict these individuals.
And she's taken precautions.
Yes. She says she has copies of all my evidence with numerous persons I trust. And these people have instructions.
Instructions to do what?
To release every fucking detail if anything happens to me, natural or not.
Wow. That's her insurance policy. Her dead man switch, basically.
It's a clear warning. Her truth will come out no matter the personal cost. And this relentless pursuit, this exposure of alleged deep corruption, it all comes at this immense personal cost, but her motivation seems unwavering.
Okay, Section 3. The broader implications. Moving beyond just her individual grievance.
Right, because her critique extends to the very nature of reform within law enforcement.
She's critical of the official reform efforts.
Acutely critical, especially of the public-facing reforms announced by NSW police. She sees them as largely symbolic.
Symbolic how?
Designed, in her view, to obfuscate rather than dismantle structural inequities. Basically, window dressing. Making things look good on the surface without fixing the underlying rot.
Can you give an example of what she means by symbolic?
She contrasts these superficial changes with the deep problems she faced. She commented on a newspaper article saying something like, letting women wear men's hats isn't reform, it's a costume change.
That's cutting. So changing uniform details doesn't fix the culture of alleged violence and corruption.
That's exactly her point. Cosmetic alterations while the real issues, the systemic rot, continue underneath.
And her summary of the real NSW police story is pretty grim.
It's stark, she says. We have officers living in cars, women assaulted on duty, and corpses being mocked. It completely contradicts any narrative of isolated incidents.
And she provides more examples of this alleged systemic abuse and lack of accountability.
Yes, anecdotes that seem small but speak volumes, like the flat tire incident.
What happened there?
Stranded at 5 a.m. with a flat tire, injured herself trying to fix it, waited 5 hours for help, saw colleagues drive past, get coffee, ignore her please.
5 hours. No one helped.
Apparently not. And the punchline. She was then formally complained about for taking less than 20 minutes on work's time to finally fix the tire herself.
Complained about for fixing her own flat tire after being abandoned.
Yes, her reaction says it all. Honestly, I don't know why I didn't tell them to eat a bunch of dicks. It shows this lack of care, this punitive culture.
A shocking disregard for a colleague's well-being.
And the petty bullying continued, pulling the chair out from under me. The incident with scattering her bullets on the floor for her to pick up.
Just acts of humiliation and cruelty seemingly normalized.
Exactly. And even things meant to be positive, like Aboriginal engagement, she describes as problematic.
How so?
Being dragged to Indigenous events by people with absolutely no idea what lateral violence is. And then that shocking incident.
Which one?
A colleague driving a police truck into Wreck Bay, an Aboriginal community, sitting on the horn and banging on the truck, screaming, "Cheshie's one of yus," referring to Michelle.
That's incredibly offensive.
Yeah.
And racist.
She calls it racist AF. Shows how cultural sensitivity became this performative, damaging act.
And she saw abuse of power and arrests, too.
Claimed that most of the assault police charges were from cops starting a fight, then charging them for something they started.
Police starting fights and then charging the public.
That's the allegation. She gives an example. A cop screams in a pregnant woman's face, gets a drop of drink on him, charges her. Michelle intervened, questioned the superior officer,
I got in trouble for it.
reprimanded,
Yeah.
highlighting that culture where questioning bad behavior gets you punished.
There was even alleged animal cruelty.
Disturbingly, yes. A cop who used to mount the footpath trying to run down Kitty Zone because I used to rescue animals, and they enjoyed making me cry as much as possible.
Running down kittens for fun. That's psychopathic behavior.
Profoundly disturbing. It speaks to a warped sense of power, zero empathy. And critically, she insists there was no safe way to report anything internally.
No safe reporting channels, even with oversight bodies.
She gives an example where the LECC, the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, accidentally emailed her someone else's confidential files, a major breach. And the incident where her locked locker was allegedly urinated in.
What happened there?
A vindictive sergeant was seen leaving the locker room, but a plausible explanation was offered. Basically, no accountability, things swept under the rug.
And trauma was dismissed.
Casually. After she was attacked with a knife on duty, her boss's response was reportedly, "She'll be right. Nothing a bottle of JD can't fix," before proudly declaring he has never seen a shrink in his life.
Wow. Toxic masculinity, rejection of mental health support.
Yeah.
Just compounding the trauma.
Exactly. So her final conclusion about the force is damning.
What is it?
They are poorly trained, not experienced, poorly educated on DV, and seem to prefer to hire and promote the sickest of the sick.
That's an incredibly harsh assessment. It paints a picture of a deeply broken system.
It really does. Which brings up that question again. How does someone navigate this? How did she keep fighting? And this leads to her insights about her own neurodivergence.
Right. Her diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome, ASD1, and ADHD. She got this after leaving the force.
Yes. And it gave her, she says, a crucial understanding of herself and her experiences. But she doesn't see it as a weakness or a reason she couldn't cope.
How does she see it?
Quite the opposite. She frames her neurodivergence not as pathology, but as the very source of her moral compass and as a tool for justice.
A tool? How?
She talks about specific traits, extreme pattern recognition, we mentioned that before, special interests in history, a high IQ. These allowed her, she believes, to see connections others do not.
Like connecting the dots on that alleged corruption network.
Exactly. And her unique cognitive style, combined with what she describes as a very strong, maybe inflexible sense of fairness, common in some neurodivergent profiles, made her unwilling to just let things go.
She also mentions her communication style.
Yes, her ability to just spit facts, even when the blunt truth is uncomfortable for others. No sugarcoating. This directness makes her a formidable opponent for those preferring ambiguity.
And she embraces being different.
Fully. She says she's weird and not liked by everyone, adding, "I'm fine with that." She feels her perspective is necessary.
Necessary how?
She sees herself as what society needs, especially someone who bothers those who are either hurting others or don't want to know about someone hurting others. She challenges complacency.
And her confrontational style is deliberate.
She admits it can be. The more obnoxious I am, the more people talk about it. There is method in my madness. It's a strategy to force the conversation.
But she wants to be taken seriously.
Absolutely. She asserts, "But I am intelligent, F. Let me prove that I am a reliable witness. Let me prove that I am worth listening to." She's asking people to look past the style and hear the substance.
And this clarity of purpose, this unique perspective, it's tied to something deeply personal.
Profoundly tied to her ultimate motivation, protecting her son.
Okay, this is clearly the heart of her fight now, protecting the vulnerable, especially her palliative son, Mason.
Yes. Her life story now has these two strands. Whistleblower against a powerful institution, and a neurodivergent mother navigating hostile systems, both police and healthcare.
And her son is central to both.
Absolutely. He has hypoplastic left heart syndrome, HLHS, a very severe congenital heart condition. His presence, his vulnerability, continues to galvanize her pursuit of truth.
And this is where the allegations become incredibly distressing. The alleged abuse and neglect of Mason within the healthcare system.
Yes. And she strongly implies this isn't separate from her whistleblowing, that it's connected, part of the attempt to silence her by attacking her where she's most vulnerable.
Through her sick child.
The implication is chilling. Her statement about it is powerful. Everyone says they would die for their child, but me, I am living for you. It captures the depth of her fight.
She's enduring this not just for abstract justice, but for her child's basic right to care, to dignity.
Exactly. And the specific allegations she makes against the healthcare system are agonizing.
Such as?
Claiming staff refused treatment for Mason, linking it to her mental health, using her status as a whistleblower, perhaps, to dismiss her concerns about her son.
Weaponizing her mental health against her child's care.
And she recounts specific medical crises. Mason's oxygen sats were 48%. He had a pneumothorax, a collapsed lung from a slipped chest drain. Critical situations.
And the response.
She alleges he was left him suffering in agony for 10 hours and laughed at me calling me names, laughed at while her child was critically ill.
That's almost unbelievable cruelty, if true.
She also describes waiting 2 days to do an x-ray in emergency when he was clearly very unwell, with his condition dismissed as anxiety, only to find another collapsed lung, a pattern of alleged dismissal and neglect.
And intimidating behavior from staff.
She alleges a cardiologist slammed my son's room door into the wall because I requested he finish reviewing my son and he stood over me, intimidating me.
Physical intimidation in a hospital setting.
And claims of staff mocking them. Horrifically, yes. She claims to have footage of your staff laughing at me and my son, as one of them made cruel comments as she was harming my son, that it's not like he can feel pain anyway because he's autistic.
Mocking a severely ill child, linking it to autism, that's beyond comprehension. Dehumanizing.
Absolutely. And alleged physical harm, too. Staff not lifting Mason, a 4-year-old, onto an x-ray board, but dragged him so violently that it cut his posterior, finding an unexplained purple handprint on my son's thigh.
These are assaults on a vulnerable child.
That's what she's alleging. And when she tried to expose this, she claims a hospital director threatened to ban me from the children's hospital for life if she put the footage online.
Threatening her rather than addressing the alleged abuse.
Showing, she argues, not a single concern about the inhumane treatment. And even though she apparently won a complaint with the Healthcare Complaints Commission, the HCCC.
They found in her favor.
Yes, but she says, you have not held any staff accountable and have punished me and my son for capturing your staff, abused me and my son on camera, suggesting the institution protected its own even after an official finding.
And she believes this isn't just isolated to her son's case.
No. She raises a wider, deeply disturbing issue, claiming 12 families at Ronald McDonald House expressed to me they were bullied into withdrawing care for their palliative or terminally ill children at Westmead Children's Hospital over funding issues. Funding.
Families bullied into withdrawing life support due to funding.
Yeah.
That's a horrifying accusation. Financial pressures impacting end-of-life decisions for children.
It's a truly chilling claim about systemic pressures, and it all ties back to her core point.
Which is?
When the powerful are protected and the vulnerable are discarded, that's when we need whistleblowers the most. Her fight is for her son, but it represents this larger moral imperative.
Her experience has become this powerful call for change, not just for herself, but for everyone failed by these systems.
Which leads us to her unwavering call to action. This isn't just about exposing the past, it's about demanding change for the future.
Yeah, it's clear her pursuit isn't about personal vengeance.
No, she says it herself. She's made great sacrifices to speak and insists she cannot accept money in exchange for my silence. It's not about a payout, it's about accountability. Systemic accountability.
On wanting to help others.
That seems to be a huge driver. Her goal, her hope, is to create a ripple effect. If my story makes one victim feel less alone, if one officer decides to act instead of staying silent, then this was worth it.
Using her suffering to empower others, breaking that cycle of silence.
Exactly. And she reveals she has more stories. Names and stories of many other policewomen that had their careers destroyed because they wanted what happened to them acknowledged.
So her case isn't unique. It's part of a pattern.
A broader alleged pattern of women in the force being silenced, their careers ruined for speaking out about misconduct or abuse. Her story represents many others, potentially.
And she's continuing this work, this drive to expose hidden truths.
Yes. She's involved in something called Operation Closure, described as a documentary crime series.
What's it about?
Covering 6 cases, 6 families, unsolved, unspoken, unanswered, children lost, people vanished, systems failed. She's using her investigative skills now as an outsider, trying to bring closure where the system allegedly failed.
And she's still engaging with the official channels, too.
Despite everything, yes. She keeps meticulous records, continues submitting complaints, documentation. She says, I really wanted and still want the NSWP to actually do something about these issues the right way.
So she initially wanted internal reform.
It seems so, but every time they decline something, I send it to a journalist.
She felt forced into the public domain due to the alleged extreme attempts to get at me over the last 15 months. She says, I didn't want this white public, but felt she had no other options.
And she has a message for people who criticize her methods, her confrontational style.
A very direct message. If you are more angry about the way in which I present my information than the content of the information,
Yep.
then you are a part of the problem. A powerful challenge. Focus on the substance, not the style, especially when the substance is this serious.
Absolutely. And her final message, directed squarely at the NSW police, is a direct challenge.
What'd she say?
Silence me now, hashtag and scoop police. They don't want anyone to know that police women are more likely attacked by their own male colleagues than by criminals on the street. They deliberately refuse to investigate so that there is no such statistics.
Wow. Accusing them of covering up an epidemic of internal violence against female officers by deliberately not investigating so the stats don't exist.
It's a huge, damning claim. And if you connect all this to the bigger picture, Michelle Carlon's story, her fight, it just highlights the immense courage and the profound risks whistleblowers take.
It really underscores how vital independent journalism and individual bravery are, doesn't it, for holding power to account.
Especially when internal checks and balances seem compromised, or worse, actively working against accountability.
So what does this all mean for us listening to this? It means we have to listen, actively listen to these voices, understand the deep-seated issues they expose.
And recognize the immense personal cost involved in speaking truth to power. This isn't just news. It's a call to confront some very uncomfortable truths about the systems that govern us all.
So to sum up this deep dive, we've laid bare these incredibly severe allegations, pervasive institutional misconduct, corruption within the NSW police force, according to these sources.
And the devastating personal toll on whistleblowers like Michelle Carlon, someone who tried to uphold justice from within only to be allegedly targeted, silenced, and ultimately forced out.
Her story, corroborated by others like Kai, backed by her relentless pursuit of documents and evidence. It just screams for genuine accountability.
Yeah, and structural reform that goes way beyond, just symbolic gestures or changing hat styles. Real deep change.
And understanding these kinds of entrenched systemic issues, it means we have to look past the easy narratives, doesn't it?
We absolutely do. We have to courageously confront these uncomfortable truths. Truths about power, about complicity, about what justice really means in practice.
These stories, they fundamentally challenge our trust in vital institutions. They force us to ask, what happens when the guardians themselves are accused of subverting the very principles they're sworn to uphold?
It's a critical question for any society. How do we ensure accountability when the accountability mechanisms themselves seem compromised?
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Michelle Carlon's harrowing story. It isn't just about alleged misconduct in one police force or even one healthcare system. It raises a universal question.
Which is?
How do we, as a society, truly protect our most vulnerable people, like her palliative son, when the very systems designed to protect, the systems sworn to uphold justice, are themselves implicated in subverting it?
What does it actually mean for our collective safety, our trust, our pursuit of truth, when these systems seem fortified against dissent, when that boys' club mentality allegedly extends right to the top, potentially impacting the lives of the most innocent and vulnerable among us?
Something profound to reflect on. That's all for this deep dive.